Halo Combat Evolved, the game that changed the FPS genre and the gaming industry as a whole.
Halo, it's finished.
No, I think we're just getting started.
The game that single-handedly introduced the world to a whole new cinematic style of gaming. A game that helped forge one of the biggest communities in the industry, and the game that helped launch one of the biggest consoles on the market today.
Oh, really?
But why was Halo Combat Evolved so successful? Why was it able to sell over 5 million copies in 4 years after its release? Why was it able to help boost the sales of the original Xbox and allow Master Chief to become one of, if not the leading mascots for Microsoft, as well as bring the FPS genre to consoles? And why was it able to start up a billion-dollar franchise with over 13 games, over 28 novels and comics, and 4 TV series, including the massive fan-made web series Red vs Blue, putting Rooster Teeth on the map?
You ever wonder why we're here? It's one of life's great mysteries, isn't it? Why are we here?
In today's video we will be looking at the whole of Combat Evolved, from its phenomenal tone and setting, to its game-changing combat, all the way to its award-winning multiplayer and passionate community. So welcome to WiseFishGaming, and today I ask the question, why was Halo Combat Evolved so groundbreaking? To first understand Halo Combat Evolved's success, we need to look at the industry at the time, specifically the FPS genre. The FPS genre in the 1990s and early 2000s was almost exclusively for PC users. There were FPS games out there that were on consoles like the 007 GoldenEye, but the real problem with these games, as fun as they were the controls. No one had yet made a controller like the ones we see today, with the 2 thumbsticks. You had the PlayStation controller, which wouldn't have let the player move and aim at the same time. You had the Dreamcast controller, which again was the same. And then you had this thing, which, what the hell was this? On top of that, FPS games also had a very specific and quite linear design to them. They were seen most of the time as corridor shooters. Some had exploration elements to them, like Doom for example, but most of the time you'd be trekking down corridor after corridor, fighting enemy after enemy, trying to get to the final boss or room. Once again, these weren't bad things, but this was the style of design around this time. Finally, FPS games had a primary focus on fun gameplay. They needed to make gunplay the core focus, and most of these games nailed it. Doom's gameplay, for example, was extremely satisfying, and its enemies' designs gave the player a wider variety as they progressed through the levels. But one thing they always seemed to lack was a rich, detailed story, which had engaging characters, story arcs, and a solid beginning, middle, and end. Half-Life was the one exception around this time, and it was bloody brilliant. But the main focus for most FPS games around this time was their enjoyable gunplay. So with those industry facts out of the way, let's move on to the first thing that made Combat Evolved that industry-changing game. When booting up Combat Evolved from the offset, there was something completely new and refreshing about the game. Right off the bat, Combat Evolved set a tone. It painted a picture of what to expect from the rest of the game. It helped the player feel a sense of mystery. The big halo ring floating in the deep emptiness of space, matched with the haunting, ethereal monk chanting soundtrack, created an instant emotional engagement. It pulled you in from the offset and made you want to know more. As well as that, the music, matched with the shot of the single ship, added to this sense of loneliness. It made the player feel like they were all alone. Nothing is there with them apart from this empty, mysterious halo ring. Right from the beginning, Halo Combat Evolved just felt cinematic. It wanted to give off a good first impression for the players. The incorporation of cutscenes made this more than just a shooter game. It wanted to tell you a story, and the use of cinematics and thematic music throughout the game helped set up scenes, tell stories, let you understand the people that matter, and give more context to the universe of Halo. Within the first 3 minutes we are shown the mysterious Halo ring, the lonely spacecraft which is on its own, on the run from a force known as the Covenant. We know who the captain is, we know the ship has an AI called Cortana, and we know that there is a badass sergeant who keeps the troops in check.
Am I right, Marines?
Sir, yes, sir!
Damn right I am. Now move it out! Double time!
This cutscene is a brilliant example of how Combat Evolved pulled the player in right from the start. It made the player want to know more about what this game entails, and it made it completely stand out from its competition. But there are so many other factors to how Combat Evolved told a rich story and helped gain player engagement. Now, forgetting all the technical limitations that Bungie and the rest of the gaming industry had back in 2001, Combat Evolved's levels were absolutely amazing. They were extremely fun to play. It felt like a lot of passion and thought had gone into them, and even to this date they are still fun to replay. But there was more to it than them just being fun sandboxes. Each level had its own distinct design that was not only adding in new things for players to learn about and experience, but they also told their own little story about the universe of Halo. The first level was a small linear level that helps the player learn all the basic mechanics of the game. It also shows them two of the enemy types, the elites and the grunts. It's a straightforward short level that brings in experienced FPS veterans into this brand new console FPS with new controls. And it brings in brand new players who may have never played an FPS game before. On top of that, the first level paints a picture on how outgunned the UNSC are compared to the Covenant. It does this by having fellow Marines dying all around you, explosions happening all over the ship, and also having alarms blaring out at all times. It's a short but sweet level that gives you an insight into what the UNSC are up against and how much of a threat the Covenant really are. The second level, Halo, is a vast open area that allows for exploration. That mystery that was set up right at the beginning is finally being acknowledged, and it encourages players to discover new things. It also teaches you how to drive a Warthog and puts you up against another enemy type, the Jackal. The wide open areas are lush and are even designed in a way that allows the player to do the mission in any order they want. But the Forerunner buildings add this sense of mystery once again and create an unnerving feeling when you are in them. While the open world sections feel like you are on Earth and relatively safe, if you ignore the alien warriors trying to kill you, the Forerunner structures are extremely large, void of life and very dark, making you feel on edge at all times. This level also allows the player to understand one thing: you are a super soldier. You are the best of the best, and the Marines who serve the UNSC are weak and rely on you to save them. This level shows that the Marines are vulnerable and that they need your help when in tough situations. It makes you care for them, and throughout the mission and the rest of the game, every time you come across a group of them, you want to keep them safe and you want to bring as many of them with you as possible. That subconscious mentality to keeping Marines alive is all because this level and its goal of trying to rescue the Marines.
It's a mess, sir. We're scattered all over this valley. We called for evac, but until you showed up, I thought we were cooked.
Truth and Reconciliation changes things up a bit. It starts by putting you in this dark nighttime area that forces you to be stealthy. It almost demands that you use the sniper rifle by starting you with it when you first land, and having sniper ammo almost everywhere within the mission. It encourages you to think tactically on how you are going to take each section. Do you take out the elites first, leaving the grunts and the jackals? Or do you take out the turrets and the grunts first to make sure you aren't suppressed by the hard-hitting plasma fire from the turrets? You also get the choice of which path to take. Do you take the middle path, which means you fight against the enemy head on, with the Marines going down the flank? Or do you go down the flank and leave the Marines to go head on? You then get your first introduction to the Hunters, two beasts that are heavily armoured, and encourage the player to be more precise with their shots. You are briefly introduced to them outside, but because of the focus on using the sniper rifle, you have a lot of distance between you and them. You learn that their weak spot is on their back, and now you are set for when you next face them. The level then goes back into more of a linear design, but this linear design then focuses the player to change up their playstyle. The sniper is pretty pointless inside a Covenant spaceship.
What the hell am I supposed to do with this inside a Covenant ship?
So now you have to swap your guns for more close quarter combat weapons. You also get introduced to the invisible elites and ones with energy swords. And let's be honest, the first time encountering an energy sword elite was pretty terrifying, especially as no matter where you look in the Covenant spaceship, the elite will always spawn behind you, catching you completely off guard. On top of all that, you then get a look into the Covenant's technology and architecture through its ship design, its prisons and its stationary vehicles. For me, this level just lets the player understand the Covenant more. You get to know their strengths, their ship design and just a bit more about their overall lore. But on top of that, the mission also gives you more insight into the brilliant storyline, letting you know that the Halo ring you are on is actually a weapon.
That's true. The Covenant kept saying that whoever controls Halo controls the fate of the universe.
Moving on to the silent cartographer, and we are in a similar style design to the second level Halo. It's an open area, it encourages exploration, the main mission can be done in any order you want, and its intro is almost similar in style to a small version of D-Day, chucking you into the action straight off the bat.
We're approaching the LZ. It's gonna be hot. Get set to tune out quick. Touchdown, hit it, Marines!
You are up against all the enemies you have been shown now: hunters, elites, grunts, jackals, sword elites and invisible elites. It lets the player test all the skills they have learned from the previous missions. But again, the open areas seem to some extent pretty safe and full of life. But venturing down into the Forerunner architecture makes the player feel really nervous, and once again filled with that mystery about what this place is. It's a nice short level once again that is based in an open sandbox that is filled with fun combat and a creepy mystery to it when venturing down into the depths of the Forerunner structures. Finally, in the first half of the game, the final level is Attack on the Control Room. This level has so much atmosphere to it. It feels cold, it's extremely open, and once again allows the player to explore the open area. But this time there is a big focus on vehicle combat. You are finally up against some of the other Covenant vehicles, the Wraiths and the Ghosts, and once again the Banshees. You also get to try out the Scorpion tank, allowing the player to feel like an absolute badass as they trek through the level, blowing up everything in their path. The level still has creepy, mysterious, large Forerunner structures, and its close quarter sections make your heart skip a beat. But for me, the level's real focus is on an open area that is worth exploring and also shows off how cold and hostile this Halo ring actually is. Every level at the start of Halo is really something great. They completely changed up the formula of FPS games by adding large open areas that encourage the player to explore and experiment on each scenario. On top of that, each level paints a picture of the world and story. They all have different focuses, be that stealth, exploration, or just a focus on storytelling. They were all crafted brilliantly, but by the mid-game, everything changes, and for me, pushed Combat Evolved into what was a great game to an absolute masterpiece. When I first played Combat Evolved back when I was a wee lad in 2001, 343 Guilty Spark was a level that I just couldn't get through without feeling like my heart was going to burst through my ribcage. This level and Ravensholm from Half-Life 2 have probably shortened my life by about 10 years through stress. The whole setting and tone from the offset was unlike any of the other levels. The Forerunner structures gave me an unsettling feeling, but I always kind of knew what I was up against or what to expect. But almost instantly the design of the swamp felt unnatural. It felt like something was completely different. The sight of the Covenant running away from pretty much nothing again made me question what the hell was going on and where am I. The music was haunting and most of the time was just some terrifying bird noises and a low drone. To then see and hear human gunfire coming from the building felt like on one hand a relief, but on the other hand like a warning sign. Entering the structure, the player is almost greeted with no sound whatsoever, apart from the low droning sound of the Forerunner building's aircon or something. There was no elites or high ranking Covenant anywhere. There was almost nothing in the building, and it's unnerving because of how quiet the whole area is. But then further along through the mission, more and more unsettling things start to show. The single drop of Covenant blood on the ground in an empty room. The luminous green light illuminated the whole room. The dead Covenant bodies piled up in the side room. The green goo dripping from the ceiling, and the deranged Marine who claims to have seen monsters.
Get away from me! Don't touch me, freaks! I won't be like you, I'll die first! Find your own hiding place, the monsters are everywhere!
It's then we are hit with the biggest twist in FPS history, the reveal of the Flood.
Get your contacts! Blast them! They're not coming! They're just tearing through us! What's the... Oh, no!
Damn it, Nathan! Fire your weapon!
I mean, I never expected this. Maybe some people did, but to introduce a new enemy, and a terrifying one at that, into this world was so new and out of the box. Not only had they developed this fantastic narrative, they had now completely flipped it on its head and shown what the bigger threat was. Their design was terrifying but brilliant, clearly showing off how the infection has taken over the host. But on top of that, their movement was unlike any of the other enemy types that we had been introduced to before. They changed up everything, and on completion of 343 Guilty Spark, I remember sitting with my controller and thinking, this game is just incredible and I am speechless. To this day, 343 Guilty Spark still is one of my favourite missions ever. Its whole design is amazing, and I will always remember my reaction when I first had that reveal of the Flood and watching the cutscene just before. But this level also pushed things in a different direction going forward, which for many people made them lose interest by the second half of the game. But I want to explain why I think the levels following 343 Guilty Spark work so well. There was a lot of controversies when it came to the latter half of Combat Evolved. A lot of people cried out that the level designs were either extremely boring or repetitive, or just a plain repeat of the past levels. And on one hand I can totally understand that. The last 3 levels are pretty much repeated, but for me there is something new about them, and for me they were great to experience again. For one, the whole atmosphere is now different. When first exploring these levels there was a sense of mystery and obscurity to them, but now second time round the designs are darker. They have a whole different tone to them now, one of destruction and emergency. You are no longer wondering what the ring is about, you are now just thinking about one thing, saving the fate of the universe and your life. Going back to the creepy small Forerunner structure rooms in 2 Betrayals felt so much creepier than they did before. You had no idea who or what to expect. Would it be the Flood, would it be the Covenant, or would it be the Sentinels? Every mission felt more urgent than before, and the new tone that was set in each of these newly designed versions of previous levels fit what the story was trying to tell. To finish on the more, going back to where it all started was a beautiful bookend to the game. The whole ship that was the human safe space was now completely destroyed. It was void of human life and it made you feel lonely once again. Almost like you were the only human left alive in the universe. The music that incorporated each of the final missions also added to this loneliness and almost hopelessness that you are supposed to feel. And why wouldn't you when you are fighting against 3 enemies at the same time, whilst also doing the impossible of destroying a world-sized structure, the Halo ring. On top of that, each level gave you a choice again, a tactical choice. When venturing through missions you weren't just thinking to yourself, should I tackle the elite first or the grunts? You were thinking, who is more of a threat to me here? The Flood or the Covenant? The Sentinels or the Flood? Sometimes in missions you could just let things take place and sneak around them. It's things like this that made me love the later missions, and although they are almost identical in design, there were so many new features to them that made them their own special level.
We must collect the index before we can activate the installation.
Now the library on the other hand was different. This was a brand new level, but its design had people hating it from the start, and to be honest I don't like this level at all. I only played it to record this footage, but for me this level is not my cup of tea. But saying that, I love the idea of it. To be under the endless threat of waves of flood constantly coming at you without a breather shows to the player how relentless and terrifying these enemies are. You understand why they need to be stopped and what will happen if they break out. Trekking through level after level you feel what Chief is feeling. You want to get out and just wipe them out completely. In terms of exploring the new enemies, the level is fantastic and really needs to be praised in that respect. But unfortunately for me, it's just 2 floors too long. It is far too repetitive for my liking to want to go back and replay it. There's no real exploration and it's extremely linear. But as I say, despite it not being my cup of tea on a gameplay spectrum, on a story level this level really does put you in the mindset of what Chief would have been going through, and it's a great way to show how terrifying and determined the Flood are. So far in this long ass video I've talked about why I feel the story was so strong in Combat Evolved. It finally brought meaningful, well thought out stories into the FPS genre through engaging characters, gripping cutscenes and fantastically designed levels. But for me, I can't go any longer without explaining my love for the gameplay. As I mentioned back in my intro, FPS games at the time had one key focus, and that was to make engaging combat for the player. Halo completely nailed its combat, but added something new to the world of FPS games, and you could say they evolved it completely. First of all, using 2 thumbsticks to move and aim at first felt very daunting, especially for someone like me who came from predominantly playing PC FPS games. But aiming the gun in Halo with the thumbsticks on the Duke just felt so natural. There wasn't a steep learning curve. The hitboxes on the enemies were precise, the aiming on the gun felt extremely smooth, and it just ran extremely well. On top of that, every gun within the game just felt new and refreshing. The M6 pistol was such a powerful gun that could take out enemies from a medium distance and headshot grunts instantly. It was a bit overpowered in multiplayer, but we'll ignore that. The assault rifle felt like a badass machine gun that could take out anyone and anything. Also, having a clip of 60 meant it was a beast in battle, and the shotgun was just so satisfying to use, especially against the horrifying Flood. Before in FPS games you used to have a wide variety of guns you could carry at once. It meant you could cycle through your guns when in combat, and it made sure you had the right gun for the situation. With Combat Evolved though, having the 2-gun system meant you always had to try and plan ahead during the level. What enemy will I be facing, and what gun would best suit my situation? As I mentioned earlier, at the start of Truth and Reconciliation, you are spawned with a sniper. This helps with the situation you are in. You can stay stealthy, keep your distance, and take out enemies from afar. But when you go into the ship, you now have to think about what gun will best suit those close quarter battles. When the Flood and Sentinels get added to the game, you then have to constantly be thinking about what gun will best serve your purposes. Shotguns are fantastic against the Flood, but not so good against the Sentinels. They are also not so good when you're up against some of the most accurate elites, as you need to get close to them to make a difference. Plasma rifles are extremely good for taking out Sentinels and elite shields, but when you have a group of Floods running towards you, it isn't the best gun to have. It works well, but a shotgun or a human weapon is a much better fit. Throughout the whole of the game, you are constantly thinking about what the best gun is for your situation, and that means for constant experimentation. You don't have every gun in your arsenal. You ideally should be swapping your guns at all times to fit the upcoming situation, especially on Legendary. But on top of that, having enemies which are also very intelligent just makes that gameplay more and more special. Elites are not only the top ranking soldiers just simply because of their size and design, their movement and intelligence is way above everything else. They duck out of the way of grenades, they stand behind grunts and fire from a distance. They also hide if they are under a lot of fire, and when their health is low they just charge at the enemy. They are all colour marked as well, letting the player know how difficult they will be. If they are red and blue, they are the sort of standard elites, but if they are gold, they are sort of a mini boss and are a lot tougher to face, especially in Truth and Reconciliation with the sword elites. But the silver elites are also a real challenge. They have a much more powerful shield, their rate of fire is increased, and they can now throw extremely accurate grenades. This colour coordinated system is also shown to some extent with the grunts. Later in the game, the silver grunts have much more powerful weapons, and they aren't the cute little aliens that you faced earlier in the game. Having this ranking system in the enemies means you are constantly looking out for what to focus on, who is more of a threat, and it gets you thinking more tactically. By the end of the game, every encounter will be much more of a challenge than the beginning of the game. You also had other things within levels to help you out during combat. If you wanted to have a focus on stealth, then having active camo helped you focus on that. You could sneak through rooms, taking out the elites and leaving the grunts to fend for themselves. There is even a room in the Attack of the Control Room which has an active camo, but is guarded by a sword elite. So this gives you a choice. Do you face the elite to get that camo so you can sneak past the Wraith, or do you ignore it and just try and take the Wraith on yourself? You also have additional shield power-ups that help out in situations like when facing the Hunters in Silent Cartographer. These power-ups just give that little bit of extra to the gameplay, and the idea of having to search for the power-ups again makes the player want to explore everywhere to make sure they haven't missed anything that could benefit them in that said level. Also, a little side note, I loved how smart the human AI were. They would move out of the way for grenades, they would be pretty accurate when it comes to the Warthog turret, but my most favourite thing was their communication. They felt so lifelike because they communicated with the chief. They let you know if all the enemies had been wiped out, they let you know where certain enemies were, they even shot at enemies' dead bodies on the floor through anger, and they just constantly voiced their opinions on things. Even when you stared at them for a long time, they just came up with some brilliant voice lines. They just had so much personality, and it was just so refreshing to have such engaging, friendly enemies on your side. They didn't seem two-dimensional, or just cannon fodder. You actually cared about them because of their little personalities. But anyway, that's just a little side note. All round, the gameplay and combat evolved was truly special. It still is extremely engaging now. The enemies felt like they were actually alive, it felt like they were constantly assessing situations, and it just made for much more of a challenging experience, especially on Legendary. Every enemy was different from the rest, elites had a different movement and mentality compared to grunts, jackals and hunters, and the Flood had a completely different style of movement and mentality to everything out there, because let's be honest, they don't care about anything. End of the day, the combat in Halo was just so much fun, and it just added to that immersion that the game had already created from the brilliant cutscenes, level design and all-round storytelling. It's hard not to keep praising Combat Evolved's campaign. It had a fantastic story that was shown to the player in such an immersive way. Its level designs were so out of the box and unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. The twist of adding the Flood was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, but its gameplay was just so addictive, and it felt so immersive. The levels may have repeated near the end, and there were a few times where it felt like it was dragging, but at the end of the day, those levels helped add to the story being told. They helped put you into the shoes of Master Chief, and allowed you to really experiment with the combat and gunplay. The AI's intelligence really pushed the FPS genre to up their game. To this date, Combat Evolved's AI is still amazing, and has inspired so many other games to do the same. I cannot praise the campaign anymore, it really was so engaging and just so much fun to play. But Combat Evolved wasn't only a groundbreaking game because of its amazing campaign, it was also its multiplayer that helped make this game a true masterpiece and a memorable piece of gaming history. Halo's multiplayer did so many things right. It had a selection of maps that were all so different. You had close quarter areas that were fast paced and honestly quite frantic, but then you also had much larger maps that felt like huge sandboxes. It let players play with all the vehicles the game had to offer. You could team up and get in tanks, you could group up in a Warthog or solo a Ghost and Banshee. There was so much fun to be had in these larger maps. It not only encouraged a lot of tactical gunplay, but it threw in vehicle combat, which I'll be honest, I don't think any multiplayer games had that back in the day. Combat Evolved wasn't online. This was before Xbox Live, but its multiplayer encouraged one thing, and that was the coming together of friends. Being able to play split screen with 3 of your friends just made for some absolutely brilliant game nights. I remember coming home from school, going to my friends and playing a game of 1v1 Slayer on Blood Gulch. It was so much fun, but it also had a healthy amount of competition. LAN parties that came from this game again just created this larger community. It brought people together, it got people working in teams, it allowed for fun moments and just brilliant memories, and because of its great gameplay, vehicle combat and wide variety of game modes, there was just so much to do. You didn't even have to play seriously. The amount of times I just dicked about playing with the physics engine with my mates was insane. Seeing what would happen if you throw a ton of grenades at a tank, or trying to flip a tank with just a Warthog. It was just so much fun to do, and it created endless hours of fun memories which I know a lot of people can recall. To also be able to play through the campaign with friends again made this just much more than just a game. It felt like a playground that you could experience with friends. Halo Combat Evolved was, and still is, a timeless classic. Even today the game is still extremely fun to play, and it has aged extremely well. There are so many factors to its success. Its amazing campaign, its completely new open level design helped push the FPS genre in a new direction. Its incredibly intelligent AI made the gameplay an absolute masterpiece, and not predictable in every encounter. Its smooth combat, its completely shocking twist, its graphical design, its beautifully composed soundtrack. Everything really came together and made for one of the best gaming experiences ever. The soundtrack to this day is still great to listen to, and that Halo theme will always be memorable. Halo Combat Evolved truly is a groundbreaking game that has inspired so many games to date. The game may be almost 2 decades old, but I still love going back and playing through it all again. Maybe I am just a Halo fanboy, but there is a reason for why I am. It's simply because Halo Combat Evolved was the game of my childhood. It made me love gaming, and it really was the most groundbreaking game I've ever played. So those are my thoughts on Halo Combat Evolved, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. If you did like this video, make sure you give it a like and maybe subscribe to the channel. It took so long to make this video, so I'd really appreciate your support. But thank you all so much for watching again and taking the time out of your day to actually watch this long ass video. But that's all for now. Thank you again, and until next time, cheers.